In February of 1992, with the signing of the Maastricht Treaty, the life of the European Union, the EU, began. As a foundation for the Eurozone, a common currency area, its members were required to meet stringent convergence criteria, the most important of these fiscal criteria being that 1. Deficit should not exceed 3% of the gross domestic product, and 2. Total debt should not exceed 60% of the gross domestic product. Admittance to the EU promised huge economic rewards and forced all member states to compete on an equal monetary playing field. This treaty failed, however, to provide any system of enforcement or punishment should member states fail to meet the criteria. This fatal combination created an environment in which member states could overburden themselves with debt without much fear of reprisal. This brings us then to the admittance of Greece into the EU in 2000. 4 years later, it was discovered that Greece fibbed its way into the EU. Its budget deficit at the time of its admittance had been nearly 3 times what it had reported, and thus over 2 times the 3% outlined by the EU convergence criteria. It would be easy to blame Greece, announcing its budget deficit as 12.7% of its GDP in November 2009 for the EU debt crisis of 2009 to 2012. But instead, financial experts say, quote, Greece's debt problem should be viewed as a spark on a stack of kindling. Considering the International Monetary Fund's projection that debt levels in the Eurozone would grow 2.5 times faster than its GDP in the years from 2006 to 2012, it is evident that Greece was not the only country in Europe with financial instability. With 13 of the 17 Eurozone members having debt levels higher than the convergence criteria maximum of 60%, it is evident that the EU sovereign debt crisis is truly a European crisis. The Eurozone was susceptible to this kind of crisis simply because it is a monetary union. This means that one currency, the euro, is used by all nations within the EU. There is, however, no fiscal union under the EU. Therefore, though currency across the borders is equal, different tax and public pension rules apply between nations, creating a divide between nations.
With Greece's announcement came a flood of fiscal and budgetary announcements throughout the EU that astonished investors and commenced financial panic. Though the impetus for crisis varied country by country, the EU crisis across the board resulted from a combination of factors including, but not limited to, the globalization of finance, easy credit and high-risk lending in the years from 2002 to 2008, international trade imbalances, and the global financial crisis of 2007 to 2012. This is demonstrated by the cartogram shown here. A cartogram is a type of thematic map that uses geographic area as a symbol scaled to proportion to represent the numerical data of public debt as a percentage of GDP. Numerical data quantitatively represents data. The features, or geographic entities, in this map are the countries and attributes, or data about the geographic feature. Is public debt based on GDP, individual fiscal policy, and failed bailout strategies? The spread of the crisis is spatially related and dependent on proximity. This idea that everything is related to everything else, but near things are more related than distant things, is the basis for the first law of geography. This is evident when it comes to Europe as individual Eurozone members. Failing economies negatively impacted on European countries, not necessarily countries around the world. This is demonstrated by the following map, in which it is evident that the government debt as percent of GDP is spatially dependent. This Robinson projection is neither equal area or conformal, but is a compromise in order to create the best view. Maps are never accurate representations or true values representations of the world because of the inherent distortion that comes along with the rendering of a spherical world onto a flat surface. However, this map shows a compromise that makes this projection most useful for its purpose.
The fear has now become that the EU will unravel with the loss of members like Greece, Spain, and Italy. As countries produce packages and plans to reduce deficit, increase the number of jobs, and more in order to bring themselves out of the financial crisis, it is evident that the crisis has had major effects on international trade, international fiscal and monetary trust, and more. In this segment, we will draw for you a picture of the effects of the EU crisis on Greece's largest industry, tourism, in the hopes to demonstrate to you the geographic effects on Greece's tourism and the EU financial crisis.
Prior to the financial crisis and its entry into the EU, Greece had one of Europe's fastest growing and strongest economies, save for its structural deficit, due in part to its hosting the Olympic Games in 2004. Upon entry to the EU, however, and with the impact of the global financial crisis, Greece's economy took a turn for the worst. Greece's two largest industries, shipping and tourism, were hit the hardest by the financial crisis, as they are most susceptible to changes in the business cycle and public view. Unfortunately, because of uncertainty within the EU and because the majority of tourists to Greece are from countries within the EU, tourism had taken a real hit. According to one article in the UK's The Guardian, 11% fewer tourists came to Greece during the holiday months in 2012 than the previous year. Those people did not vacation to Greece, spent 12.5% less during their stay. As this article points out, these figures do not bode well for Greece's attempt to keep its deficit reduction plan. Though Greece has managed to, through austerity and other measures, decrease its primary deficit significantly, those measures, which have resulted mainly in citizen taxation, have hurt the private sector and given energy to its own recession. The private sector and small businesses are what keep Greek tourism running and keep Greek tourists coming back. And with nearly 1 in 5 of the Greek workforce working in the industry, tourism is an integral part of changing the crisis on its head.
In June of this year, the government was so desperate to revamp the industry that it elected a tourism minister for the first time since 2009. Olga Kefalogianni told BBC that the government's message is that it's back to business for Greece, and that they will be encouraging foreigners to choose Greece. Unfortunately, domestic tourism has not seen any increases because natives are too cash-strapped to afford to travel back to their villages. Post-June political elections, Greece has seen a rise in tourism. In a July Bloomberg report, Kefalogianni described different measures the government is negotiating in order to stabilize and revolutionize tourism. She claimed that tourism represented nearly 18% of Greece's GDP, accurate to 2012 data, with the potential to grow a lot more. She also reiterated that tourism has the potential to produce jobs, which is one of the most important things for Greece to do right now. The government has been working on privatizing regional airports and also lowering their value-added tax. In another Bloomberg report on October 10th, Kefalogianni reported that the Greek tourism industry has proved to be the most resilient of the economic factors, and that the industry has seen increases since the stabilization of its country's policies. She also reported that the current government is committed to maintaining its status as a member of the EU and will not go back to the drachma. With reforms to the tax system and an incredible 72% increase in the Athens Stock Exchange, the atmosphere in Greece is looking less and less bleary.
Though there is still some political unrest and businesses are still opening later and closing earlier, with some declaring bankruptcy and shutting down altogether, it appears as though Greece's economy is on the up. Tourism in its current state is not at all what it was in 2009. However, numbers are increasing and projections for this summer are positive. Greece knows tourism is a sector to count on for the job creation and for the stabilization of the economy, and it will continue to take measures to ensure its health and growth.